Hey, this is Recovery with Addict Kent. So, I'm sorry that I've been absent. It wasn't my fault. The internet here went kaplooey. So, you know, can't help the foreseeings of God, right? So, just for today, the 13th. Oh no, I'm a thief! Oh. Whatever. I don't believe in that superstitious garbage. Something different. We had to have something different. We thought we found it in drugs. Boy, were we fooled, eh? Many of us have always felt different about our people. We know we're not unique in feeling that way. We have many addicts share the same thing. We searched all our lives to find, to make us all right, to fix that. Different places inside us, to make us whole and acceptable. Drugs seem to fill that need. When we were high, at least, no longer felt the emptiness or the need. There was no one drawback. The drugs, which were our solution, quickly became our problem. Once we gave up drugs, the sense of emptiness returned. At first, we felt despair because we didn't have any solution to our own, to that miserable longing. But we were willing to take direction and begin to work our steps. As we did, we found we'd been looking for that something different. Today, we believe that our lifelong yearning was primarily the knowledge of God. The something different we needed was the relationship with a loving God. The steps tell us how to begin that relationship. My God is the something different that always was missing in my life. I use the steps to restore the missing ingredient to my spirit. So, how do we find that? It's very difficult for different people. That was the NA book. And I also found the AA book, so I'll be reading that from now on as well. So stay tuned for a little bit of fun, love, and joy, happiness. So, 14th, repairing the damage. Good judgment is a careful sense of timing, courage, and prudence. They're all the qualities we shall need when we take step 9. Found in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, page 83. To make amends can be viewed in 2 ways. First, that repairing the damage for what I have damaged my neighbor's fence, I make an amend. That is the direct amend. The second way is modified my behavior. For if my actions have harmed someone, I make daily effort to cause no further harm. I mend my ways. and that is indicative amend, which is the best approach, the only right approach, provided that I am causing no further harm in so doing, is to do both. If harm is done, then I simply mend my ways. To take action in this manner assures me of making honest amends. So, let's read the other part of step 1. When we were last together, we did the first part of step 1. Today, we are looking at denial. Denial is part of our disease that makes it difficult, if not impossible, for us to acknowledge reality. In our addiction, denial protected us from seeing the reality of what our lives had become. We often told ourselves, given the right set of circumstances, we might be able to bring our lives under control. Lie. Always skillful and defending our actions, we refuse to accept responsibility for our damage done by our addiction. We believe that if we tried longer and hard enough, substituted one drug for another, switched friends, or changed our living accommodations or occupations, our lives would improve. Lie. This realizations repeatedly failed us, yet we continued to cling to them. We denied that we had a problem with drugs, regardless of all evidence to the contrary. We lied to ourselves, believing that we could use again successfully. We justified our actions despite the wreckage around us, resulting from our addiction. The spiritual part of our disease, the part we may recognize only by feeling the emptiness or loneliness when we first get clean, is perhaps one of the most difficult aspects of addiction, because this part of our disease affects us profoundly and so personally. We may be overwhelmed when we think about applying a program of recovery to it. However, we need to keep in mind, recovery doesn't happen overnight for anyone. You see, I didn't walk into the program to a man who had 30 years and get 30 years. Didn't happen that way. I got here one day at a time. Well, we're going to have another reading because there's about 6 pages. I don't think you want to hear me read 6 pages. So I'll finish this section and we'll stop in just a bit. As we start looking at the effects of our disease, we are sure to see that our lives have become unmanageable. We see that in all the things that are wrong with our lives again. So our experiences are individual and vary widely from addict to addict. Some of us realize our lives have become unmanageable because we felt out of control emotionally or began to feel guilty about our drug use. Some of us lost everything: our homes, our families, our jobs, and our self-respect. Some of us never learned how to function as human beings at all. Some of us have spent time in jail in institutions. I've done both. And some of us came very close to death, 8 times for me. However, our individual circumstance, our lives have been governed by obsessive, compulsive, self-seeking behavior, and the end result has been unmanageability. Perhaps when we arrived at NA, without realizing it, the problems we had for what they were, because our self-centeredness, we were often the last ones to realize that we were addicts. Many of us were persecuted by friends or family to begin to attend NA meetings. Other members received even stronger encouragement from the courts. No matter how it occurred, our long-standing illusions had to be shattered. Honesty had to replace denial before we could face the truth of our addiction. So, we'll stop there, and tomorrow we'll look at clarity. So, how do we find this? It's very simple. God. This is a book I think you should get after you have a bit of time in. It's called Faith to Faith, A Daily Guide to Victory. It's by Kenneth Copeland. Real intercession. Isaiah 59 verse 16 says, "And he saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no intercessor." When someone hurts us, our human nature reaction is to strike back, to ask God to clobber them. But that's not the God way. I realize that one time, when some relatives of mine got robbed, I was praying about the solution and puzzled over it. Lord, I began to ask, why did you let that happen? Why didn't you just knock that thief over the head when he tried to do that? Suddenly, God embellowed me to back up from the situation and look with spirit fullness instead of purely nature eyes. When I did that, I knew the answer to my question almost quickly as I had asked it. It was because of His mercy. God has granted great mercy, not just for me, but for my family and for others too. Think about how the next someone does you wrong. Instead of asking God to knock the person in the head, like I did, consider the fact that our origin, as he may be, he may well have grandmothered somewhere who's praying for him to be saved. Stop and remember that God loved him enough to die for him, that he is longing to perform, not punish him. Pardon him, not punish him. Then you can begin to pray for him instead of against him. Enlightening yourself with his grandmother, anyone who happens to be praying for him. You can go to the Lord for money for him. and you can go up against the devil on his behalf. That's real intercession, and it throws the forces of darkness into total confusion. They have absolutely no defense against it. The Lord is looking for people who are whole enough, committed enough to do that. Dare to be one of them. When you're tempted to clobber someone, dare to change his life instead. Sometimes we have to be the better person. Sometimes we have to forgive those who have trespassed against us. Remember that. Think about this for a second. When you were lost and in your using days, did your mama or your papa pray for you? Probably, if they were Christian. If not, probably your grandmother or your grandfather was praying for you. Probably, most likely, it only stands to reason. So remember, pray for them. Keep them in your prayers. Help them. Don't hinder them. Be Christ-like, as the Messiah would. God bless.